Welcome to the first episode of UNBIND in 2023. My name is Risa Pecoraro. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Bindable, and I'm being joined today with Charlie Sidoti, who's the Executive Director of InnSure, which is an industry-funded nonprofit focused on fostering innovation in insurance and risk management. Charlie and I have worked together for years in a couple of different capacities, and I think he's just one of the most interesting people in insurance. He has a Rolodex that spans, coast to coast, and I think that he's also probably one of the nicest people in insurance too. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Charlie, before we jump in, I'd love to talk about you a little bit and how you got started in insurance.
Yeah, that's a great story. And thank you for the kind words. I would say that you're one of the nicest people in insurance. But yeah, everybody's got a story how they got into insurance. I don't think there's a huge contingent of people who say, since sixth grade, I want to be in insurance. My personal story is I went to a maritime academy. There's only a few of them. Massachusetts Maritime, it's right on the Cape Cod Canal. I was studying to be an engineer, working on ships, and that's what I was going to do. And I was interviewing my senior year to do that. But this company did come to the campus to interview. So I took an interview with St. Paul Companies, which is now part of Travelers. And I wasn't going to take the job. I wasn't even interested. It was more of a practice interview. But literally, like the day after I interviewed, this huge fishing vessel sunk right in the Cape Cod Canal, right at the edge of our campus. And so the whole student body was out looking at this sunken ship blocking the channel. And I saw this guy with a clipboard and a white shirt. And I was like, what are you doing? And he was representing the insurance company on salvage for this ship. And I asked him about St. Paul Companies, and it just led to like, wow, this is really interesting. And long story short, I ended up starting out as an ocean marine underwriter. And then the property people realized I had an engineering background. And so they recruited me into the large property unit. And then I spent 25 years in the industry, which is kind of a fun story, but most people have fun stories.
I'm pretty sure that not most people's career stories start with a sunken ship.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah, pretty serendipitous. So, as I mentioned, Charlie, you and I have worked together in a bunch of different capacities. You worked for carriers for, I think, more than 20 years. So then, what happened after that? What led you to forming InnSure?
Yeah, so I was at One Beacon for insurance, and then I left there to actually go work on some analytics, kind of insurance adjacent startups. And I was working out of a place called Cambridge Innovation Center. It was a small startup, and we were kind of doing our thing. But we connected with Tim Rowe, the founder of CIC, which, they had this model where it's essentially the core, it's a real estate kind of co-working facility, but they supported a lot of innovation hubs focused on different industries and issues. And we connected with Tim, and he said, you should build an insurance focused innovation hub, associated with Cambridge Innovation Center. And this was around 2019. And so we launched it with this initial mission of fostering innovation in insurance. And CIC is a great place. There's kind of a lot going on. But then the pandemic hit, and we're trying to figure out what's our focus. How do we differ from like InsurTech Hartford, InsurTech Connect, all these InsurTech kind of focused innovation communities. And we really started to focus on where we think the problem is, and hopefully we'll get to talk about it, but this intersection of insurance, innovation, and climate change, which we think is really kind of the next 10 to probably 30 or 40 years of insurance innovation. A lot of it will focus on the issues around climate change.
Right. I don't, one of the things I thought was interesting about InnSure when you were first getting it going was how you were kind of casting a wide net to try to figure out, was it cyber, was it mobility? And then of course, climate was part of that conversation as well. You were trying to figure out, I think, where InnSure could do the most good. So could you talk about your mission a little bit?
Yeah, and it was definitely an evolution as you described. We decided we needed to narrow on climate kind of risk like I talked about. But as we got into it, it's really massive. So we are a nonprofit, like you said. We are mission driven, and we try to look at these insurtech insurance issues through the lens of like societal needs. Like the society needs insurance to be good, to support the risks and the changing risks that are faced by individuals, enterprises, and communities. And so we've kind of identified these 4 pillars of what we're trying to do, looking at that kind of insurance products and services. But how can insurance products and services be better to do 4 things? Close the protection gap, which hopefully we can talk about as well. But we also think insurance products and services can accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy. They can also incentivize investment into community resilience. And we think, there's a lot of talk about net carbon zero. We think the next area is nature positive practices and systems. So those 4 things: the protection gap, the low carbon economy, community resilience, and supporting nature.
Yeah, no, that's great. And as you did mention, you're a nonprofit. So how do you make money when you're a nonprofit and then also be focused on social good? How does this work?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about kind of our revenue model. We have a revenue model, and kind of like every other for-profit company. Corporate sponsorships from some corporates are just interested in supporting the mission. Others also look at the protection gap and these opportunities in the space as huge market opportunities. You hear a lot about like clean tech is the industry of the future. You should be investing in that. There are huge markets for the insurance industry to support. So we have corporate sponsorships. We also have individual memberships that we're rolling out. Individuals in the industry probably don't know a lot about some of these markets, and this is a way for professional development. So those are kind of the main corporate and kind of individual things. But we also look at the climate side. There's real pain around like clean tech industry, like like 50 times the amount of investment that's going into insurtech is going into clean tech. And those evolving solutions are really having trouble getting insurance. And so they have real pain. And there's a lot of grant money going towards supporting the clean tech industry. So we're kind of part of that ecosystem as well. And I'm trying to learn how to do this whole grant stuff, which is kind of interesting and fun for sure.
Right. Well, I think it's, reflect one of the other things that I thought was really interesting about InnSure was how it really blended so many different facets of problem solving and, creative and critical problem solving, where you had people from industry, people from business, people from nonprofit, and people from academia. So all those folks were kind of coming together, and it sounds like you're pulling from all of those resources as well to, to really make a business out of InnSure as well.
Yeah, the academia world is super interesting and somewhat new to me over the last 3-4 years. We have a deep relationship with Northeastern University. They're launching a new master's in insurance program, and we work with the students all the time. It's great. We've also done some stuff with Syracuse University. They have their dynamic sustainability lab. They're doing some amazing kind of research on the clean tech side. And we're working with a number of different universities, and it's, they have amazing kind of insights and information. And what I think we bring to the table is they often ask, like, what the heck is insurance doing? How can insurance operationalize this? And that's always a difficult thing for universities to do, is operationalize their R&D. So we want to be this conduit to the industry to say, hey, the industry can do a lot of cool things. There's a lot of expertise over here. And, our original kind of connect, learn, solve strategy is still in effect. Like, we want to connect people across traditional boundaries, from insurtech to clean tech to corporate to academia. We think that's where some of the really interesting things can happen, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So let's dive a little deeper. And we know that your focus is on climate, but more specifically, what are some of the things that you're working on right now?
Yeah, I'll talk about this community embedded initiative that we're working on. I read your I forget the name of it. I'm sorry. You have this research
The
report.
climate gap
Yeah, it talks about the protection gap, which is great, because the protection gap is like the difference between economic losses and insured losses. And it has this headline in it that was newsflash, you don't have to be in insurance to sell insurance. And it goes into that whole embedded. And so we really believe in that stuff. And one of the things we're trying to really kind of work on is what we think is the ultimate embedded insurance, which is community embedded insurance. If you look at that protection gap, that protection is, a lot of times it's isolated in communities where the risks are severe. And right now there's kind of an option of private insurance or flood insurance through the federal program, which isn't necessarily affordable or accessible sometimes. And like when Ian came through, I've heard numbers as low as 10% of the people had flood insurance. Like, that's not a good thing for the community. It's not a good thing for the industry, because it makes the industry irrelevant over time. So, and there's been a number of research. Carolyn Kuski over at Wharton has done a lot of research on how you can embed insurance into a community. Like, actually, your house comes with insurance, funded by like public-private partnerships. There's a lot of different ways to do it. So we have a task force that's kind of working on how can we help bring some of those solutions to the market. And it really requires that kind of connecting people across traditional boundaries. There's investment that's looking for return. There's also a lot of investment that's looking for impact, and closing that protection gap is impact. And how do we kind of bring all those parties together?
Yeah, I think that sort of leads me to what, so how would you describe the industry's response to climate change, knowing that there are so many different kinds of parties with so many different kinds of motivation to solve for this problem? Because I don't know that people would typically think of insurance companies, trying to solve the problem for impact, right? They try to solve for profit. So what's your lens on the industry?
I think it's a tale of different stories. I think there's the industry has to do more. It's so big of a challenge. I think they're starting to realize that, and there is a lot going on. A lot of different companies are doing things, but the challenge with kind of the whole climate change, it's causing the risk to be more uncertain, which is like, insurance is kind of based on certainty, but insurance also has like a historic role of addressing kind of these issues and unique capabilities for identifying, analyzing, and quantifying risk. And the industry needs to, as an industry, really lean into that important role. I know some of our board members, we always talk about Underwriter Laboratories 130 years ago. Electricity was at like 1% of market share, and it was burning down buildings and people were getting electrocuted. And the industry didn't lean in and say, like, we can't insure this. The industry leaned in and created Underwriter Laboratories that said, we need to help mitigate these losses so that we can insure it. And if you look at that protection gap, there's the top end, which is the risk, and the bottom end, which is the insurance that needs to be sold. I think we need to do some great stuff like you guys are doing to sell more insurance, but we also need to mitigate the risk to bring the losses down and help people kind of, protect themselves, because the scope of the risk is so huge. The industry needs to not just kind of price and transfer risk. We need to do more on the risk mitigation side for sure.
Well, I've always pointed to insurance as an industry who had early awareness of climate change and climate risk, and it wasn't political at all. It was just a matter of numbers, right? Actuarial science said, it's just, if you think of what actuaries do, they're there to make sure that they can price risk and do it profitably, because it can be catastrophic if they don't. And you could quite clearly see the change in perspectives through the reinsurers. What do you think keeps the industry then from taking the math and then pushing forward with mitigations?
I think it's I don't really understand why, but I think it's a mindset. I think the industry has evolved, and it really has been over like the last 40 years. When I started, like I said, I started as an underwriter, and then I went to the engineering group at St. Paul Companies. At that time, like the engineering groups in the industry, the budgets were like 2% of revenue goes to engineering to help our customers. And by the time I left, like 25 years later, it was like 0.4% that was for risk control, risk management, like helping customers. But what you're seeing now, it's driven by, I think, this climate risk thing. Companies are starting to talk about it and invest in mitigation a little bit more. But you're also just seeing the insurtechs are using data in different ways to inform their customers. You see it really on a lot of the cyber companies, like they have robust kind of investments in mitigation. And I think that is the future of kind of insurance, is how the mitigation, it's not just risk transfer, it's a whole package to help customers, both individuals like homeowners. Like homeowners haven't needed a lot of risk mitigation, but now it's like, some properties are going to go, the valuation of some properties is going to go to zero as sea level rises.
Sure.
Over decades. So how you manage that, how you mitigate those losses, how you manage the rebuild of those homes. There's a lot that the insurance industry can do. We're just kind of starting on these things.
Well, it seems like it makes long-term sense. I mean, there's probably only so much capital, and if you add to consolidation of the industry within that, right, there's just at a certain point, then that risk will get transferred somewhere else, whether it's the government or the, homeowner specifically, or the business owner, or, the property, the landowner. So, I mean, I think from a long-term perspective, certainly makes sense that you want to try to get ahead of it. And I mean, nothing happens overnight, right? Either in insurance or probably climate change, it takes decades to really sort of know what you're doing works. So, I agree. I think that there is just a lot to take. I know that, it's the concept of risk mitigation is nothing new, right? We've been doing it for forever with home products, for example. Do you have a burglar alarm? Do you have a fire alarm, right? Now, water sensors, right? So these are all things that happen at scale in the industry anyway. It's maybe a little bit of a different conversation when you talk about climate though, right? Because it's not located to like maybe one position. It's really global, right? It sounds big.
And the numbers are massive, like the scale and scope of the impacts, which is kind of why we try to focus on too, like how do you, like that transition to a low carbon economy, does the insurance industry support some of these emerging technologies that
how do you model it even, right? Like,
that's always the problem. One, how do you model it? Because they're all brand new. But two, like solar and wind are well established and big, and they're big markets. They're worth looking at. But when you start looking at kind of like advanced geothermal, we're going to build kind of geothermal kind of power generation everywhere. But it's a very nascent industry. And for the next, insurance companies look at like the next 1-3 years, well, how big is the whole market? It's not necessarily that big.
Right.
You
Right.
need to get beyond that. I think of it like cyber 20 years ago, or
Yeah.
like
Right.
biotech industry 20, 30 years ago. Like the first companies that got in there, like cleaned up. And
Yeah.
the cyber
Well,
companies, it's tougher now, but they made a lot of money in those early years.
yeah, well, and I think the industry is comfortable with that 20, 30-year like time period where we're like, okay, now we really know what's going on. We have 30 years worth of data at least to depend on.
Yeah.
And I think climate change or climate risk is probably becoming one of those areas where, what happened in the past may not as well predict what's starting to happen in the future. And the industry does not love that necessarily, but I think you're right. The people who, the early adopters, who can figure out how to work together, are probably going to, in long term, sort of win this. So, I'm really impressed by the kinds of, companies that you're working with, and, their commitment to trying to solve things that, aren't going to be turned over in, 1 year or even 3 years or 5 years. These are really long-term plays.
Yeah. It's super exciting. And we talk to a lot of executives and like the, people that have been around for a long time, but we also talk to like this next generation of kind of talent. I love working with the students at Northeastern. We also love like working with the young people in the industry or fairly new to the industry. And they have this level of passion, one about their jobs, but two about like, when you talk to them about these things, like they're excited to like, yeah, the industry can really do a lot here. And
Right.
so I'm very optimistic about kind of what the industry can do and what can actually be done around some of these climate issues.
So do you think I know, again, you access a lot of different people, who kind of come together to work on these products and these ideas, but do you think there's something generational about it? Like the messages that maybe folks who are just sort of starting out in their careers have been hearing about climate versus folks who are maybe a little bit more senior, like you and I?
Yeah, I do. I definitely do. I think you see some of this in some of the policy and like the business roundtable, whoever they are, whoever those people are, they voted a few years back to say companies need to have a purpose beyond just making money. And I think corporate, the C-level people are starting to kind of come around to it, but it's not the world that they worked in for 30 years. They're in a lot of meetings day in and day out. Like what are we going to do for the next quarter? They're focused on these things. I think the young people certainly that we meet a lot, they want to have purpose well beyond their job, and they want their job to contribute to their purpose. It's not a job. It is not I think the older generations tend to like the job is to get money for me personally, to make money for the company, and then I get my purpose in other things in life. I think
Right.
that's a little bit of a generational thing, but I don't know. I'm not that. That's
Not a
what I see
sociologist.
from my perspective. Yeah, exactly. That's what I see from my thing. And I've personally leaned into it. Like we are at InnSure, the kind of the team that we're building, that we're all super passionate about
Right.
fixing things and making the
Right.
world.
It's about that impact, right? Aligning with impact.
Yeah.
So I'd like to take a little bit of time to talk to you about maybe patterns and innovation that you may or don't see. As you mentioned, you kind of transitioned from working from a carrier to doing some InsurTech startups, some of which were on your own and some of which were with other people. And I've watched InSure sort of engage with the InsurTech community in a variety of topics. Do you feel like, or do you see that innovation in climate tech or climate change follows some of those patterns that we've seen before in InsurTech startups, or do they shake those different?
We think so. One, on the corporate side, there's not a lot of dollars going into innovation, even though there's probably more than there was. But like the data that we've seen is like R&D investment in financial services, which includes banks and insurance. I think it's like 1.5% of revenue, compared to other industries on average spend about 8%. which is less at the, so those are the corporates. But if you look at InsurTech investment, there's a lot more money than if you go back 10, 15 years going into InsurTech investment. But we would argue, and we have some slides on this that we often show, there, if you look at that whole pie of InsurTech investment, a big chunk of it is spent on how do you get to the customer, which is definitely needed, but it's like existing products and services for the most part. So that's like the biggest chunk. The next biggest chunk is on pricing and underwriting, which doesn't always solve the problem. It does put a better price on risk, but it actually exacerbates that protection gap because like it's more about pricing and risk transfer and pulling money out, and it's not about new products. So we think there's opportunities there. And one of the smallest pieces, like only 10% of InsurTech investment goes into really like new novel products and services. And a lot of that is not on climate stuff. Like there's stuff like pet insurance in there. Like there's nothing against pet insurance. Don't come up.
No, you'll need it.
But I think the world needs some of these tougher risks to be insured. So we think there needs to be money going into some different spaces on that InsurTech kind of pie chart.
Got it. Do you think there are barriers to adoption that are unique to climate tech? You know, and I don't know if our audience knows about all the regular barriers to adoption in the insurance space. But, you know, what are you seeing in terms of
for the insurance products or the actual climate tech stuff?
The climate, climate tech, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, there's some weird things like even like very mature kind of well-known stuff like solar panels and you know, the hail kind of went through Texas and it caused like all this hail damage, and the industry does their kind of loss analysis like they always do, and it's like, well, raise the deductibles and, you know, put a sublimit on it, and it removes capacity, and it creates weird friction in the like solar panel, like, hey, there's all these government credits, you can get solar panels for nothing and do all this, and then it's like, but I don't even want it because like insurance headache, you can't get insured, then I gotta fix it. And so I think the industry needs to think about those friction points and say, how can we like reduce the friction on the ones where there is high friction, but also how can we, like, the other example is tankless water heaters. Like tankless water heaters are low carbon footprint and low loss. How can we create incentives to like accelerate those? Right.
That's a great point. You do see incentives that happen through, I think, you know, climate and energy saving programs, but those are usually through maybe government. I know Massachusetts has a program, or maybe, you know, private industry, but nothing from insurance. That's a good point.
There's a lot of opportunity to do that. And it kind of gets back to a lot of the data analytics, like we need information on who has Energy Star equipment in their building, or who has tankless water heaters. Where does that data come from? So we're working on some data initiatives that hopefully kind of make some of that data more available to the industry to create new products that incentivize the transition.
Yeah, no, I think that's, you know, that's really interesting to me, because that really then is truly a new product. It's not sort of trying to better manage the existing product with, you know, an endorsement or, you know, a new, you know, scope of the product. That's something that's just truly potentially innovative.
Yeah, that's the stuff there. It's not easy. I mean, I understand why companies are like, let's just do this, let's just do that. Some of these things are really hard, but you know, that's what makes the day fun too.
Right. Right. I mean, I think, you know, so if you go back to that, the Underwriter Laboratories example, that was probably really challenging to do at the time, especially given the lack of, you know, there was nothing digital. There was, you know, I mean, it was way beyond, you know, anybody being in one place at the same time. So, and the effort to collect this information, you know, across a whole country, right? I'm sure the people who started it didn't think that they'd be done in their lifetime, right? So maybe there's some parallels there, right, to reacting to a moment and trying to be more proactive than reactive.
Yeah, I think that's the key. The proact, like Underwriters Laboratory was launched at 1% when the electricity
Yeah,
penetration
right.
was at 1%. The industry was so forward looking, and they threw engineers at it, not
Right.
actuaries. Like
Oh,
that's
yeah.
I think that is a trend that has changed over time. There's more actuary, nothing against actuaries too. I love pet insurance, I love
We
actuaries,
need them
but we
for
need them
sure.
both. We need them both. But engineers can help solve these things that don't necessarily exist and have the data yet.
Right, right. And I'm assuming you're seeing some of the other more common themes in technology play out as part of climate tech. So use of cloud, the use of AI or machine learning potentially. Anything really interesting out there that you've come across so far, or
Yeah,
just sort
I
of like
mean,
general trends?
I think absolutely you're exactly right on all those. The use of AI, it's fascinating around, like we try to sub-segment the kind of the categories of climate tech, which is like,
Right.
energy production, land use, building efficiency, but there's this whole like other category that's like climate management, which is
Mm.
like carbon accounting and like all these things that are like, quite frankly, I'm not an expert in, but I'm trying to kind of learn a lot about. And like companies are trying to just figure out, like, what are my scope 1 emissions, scope 2 emissions, like all this stuff, like back through their supply chain. And the insurance
Wow.
industry
Right,
is starting to look at, like, well, what about my policyholders? Like, what does the
right.
portfolio look like in terms of carbon emissions footprint? So it's really interesting, and it's not just AI and data, but it's like, software as a service to help
Right.
manage it and
Mhm.
communicate down through the organization. And we think like a lot of those are potential data sources for, like, they're providing new insights on the 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 other corporates that are just trying to manage their kind of outward facing, their disclosures and their,
Mhm.
like, what they are doing. But that
Right.
also, like, insurance industry models a lot on physical assets. But I
Mm.
think one of the transitions and changes is going to be, it's going to be more on activity-based things. Like,
Hmm.
how much energy are you using? What are you actually doing? So those are different types of exposure characteristics that I think the most forward-thinking insurers are starting to kind of expand their definition of what an exposure is and how we characterize it.
Right, right. So, we've talked a lot about like big ideas in this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like very future forward thinking, but I think you just kind of, you know, put something into my head where, if an insurer could do something to start today, right? You don't have to, make a 5-year investment in this, but if they could change something about how they engage with climate risk relative to insurance today, what would you think makes the most sense for them to start to do?
So yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of tiers to that, like, and actually I'll get into a second, but it starts with like thinking, like just the general mindset. We're trying to, they're always trying, you're building products and services. It's like, what do customers want?
Mhm.
And then there's the risk piece, like, what are we insuring against? Like, I think if you start really thinking about, there's a whole world of really real kind of compelling risks. How do we
Mhm.
build products that help people with these significant risks, as opposed to, I think the industry, not that it should absolutely spend more time on what the customer wants, but the customers don't necessarily know what they want, especially on these climate things that are kind of evolving, and they're
Mhm.
it's a train coming at people. They don't see it. It's like a year, it's like 10 years out or 20
Right.
years out. So we have the unique capabilities, started with a dialogue that, like, you need to understand that these risks are severe and they apply to you because of
Mhm.
where you live or what you're
Mhm.
doing. And if they start with that mindset of we're going to attack the hardest risks and do it well, like they can figure out the solutions over time and how to do it. And we can help them. We'd love to help people
Yeah.
or work with people. So I think it's more about the mindset of kind of, and you know, this is what we do, but the impact, like, so insurance has a societal role beyond, not us as a nonprofit, but the insurance industry does. They need to
Right.
kind of step up to and embrace that.
Right. Well, I think we've, you've seen that over time, of course, where, making like auto insurance mandatory, of course, right? Which, helped protect both
Yeah,
individuals, but also helped, protect the industry a little bit, right? And that they could, more predictably, figure out, risks and losses for us and transfer
yeah.
fault as needed. So, we've definitely seen that before. And I think, sometimes people respond to, carrots or sticks. And, so it's been really interesting thinking about how, for example, how the insurance, if you go back to that solar panel discussion, insurers could probably work with local government agencies who are running these climate and energy programs and, maybe offer, build a product specific to whatever changes people are making in their energy use, and hopefully offer a discount or some sort of incentive to to move people in that direction.
Yeah, I think
I'm not
that's,
an underwriter or an actuary, but those are
I
the,
know.
from a product perspective, those are the things I think about.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done on both the kind of helping the people who make and install the solar panels, make them more
Right.
hail, whatever. I think there are a lot of policy issues, like you said, like working with the local government. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of people working on those policy challenges. And we don't want to be a policy shop. I'm not here to
Right.
kind of lobby anything, but what I think sometimes happen is people say like, oh, flood, that's a policy issue. Like product improvements don't matter. Like the government needs to weigh in. Like that's not, there's some truth to that, but it's not true. Like it's not completely true. Like product enhancements, product improvements in
Mhm.
the private market
Right.
will make the world better.
Right.
And they're also an opportunity to make money. And so we're like, don't think about like, if we know a lot of you product people are not necessarily not care, but it's not your job to figure out these big policy issues. But if you lean into what you do really well, the product piece, there's opportunities galore, we think. And then we think there is this middle world that is like, how can the policy changes? How can we work with the policy people to optimize the product and the policy together to really kind of, have even bigger impact in some really hard areas to address.
Right. Well, I think I think it goes back to what you said earlier around how, what you've done at InnSure is you're working across boundaries and borders from, traditional places. And that's really what insurers would be, required to do in order to really make impactful, lasting change, both to the, societal benefit, but also their own benefit, right?
Exactly. Long term,
So,
there's huge markets to be made here.
yeah, of course, of course. So on that note, Charlie, I want to thank you for your time. It's always great talking to you and getting your insight and perspective. And for our audience out there, if this is your first time listening to Unbind, please check out our prior episodes. Got a lot of good stuff in there.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
everyone.
much. This has been great. Thank you, Risa. It's always a pleasure to kind of talk to you, and we love what you guys are doing over there. So keep it up.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Charlie.